and I'm not an expert on the Europe legislation, so if you have anything to add, or if I'm saying something incorrectly, just correct me, please go ahead. I want to give a talk and an introduction now, and we can have a discussion later on for the rest of the slot. Okay, so it's just introduction first. Okay, and we lost the video. Did I touch something? Amazing. Okay, so basically we will talk about what's happening right now, why this can be a problem for us, what kind of solutions we have for these problems, and what we don't know, and then, as I said, we will have open sessions. So basically, we have a new radio equipment directive in Europe. Sometimes we call this the Code Red, and it's the successor of the old RNTTE directive. Basically, these directives are like a legal framework to hold the actual regulations in Europe. The idea is to do harmonization and modernization of standards. So harmonization was also already the intention for RNTTE, so we have all the same rules all over Europe, and manufacturers only have to produce one type of device which works in the whole of Europe, and these standards are getting a bit outdated, so it was a good idea to update them. There's also increase of software-defined radios. So as you know, these devices getting more powerful. You can do more fancy things with it. And also one thing which they see in Europe is interferences with weather radars and DFS, which they want to avoid. This has been a topic for quite a few years, as you know. And all of that is a bit connected with FCC router lockdown. So I've been actually told that the Code Red, which we have, is a source of inspiration for the FCC. This is why they started. We just take longer to implement things here in Europe. So in general, the radio lockdown is only a very small portion of that Code Red thing. So there's an Article 3, number 1, and when it says the radio equipment shall be so constructed that it complies with the following essential requirements, and one of them is it supports certain features in order to ensure that software can only be loaded into the radio equipment where the compliance of the combination of the radio equipment and the software has been demonstrated. So, do you know what to do exactly now? I don't. It's very vague. We don't know exactly what we should do, but something should be done. And this newly introduced devices which intentionally emit or receive radio waves for radio communication. So it kind of applies even to GPS receivers, for example, which only receive. It applies to laptops, smartphones, routers, IoT devices, you name it. There are some exceptions, like for radio amateurs and some special users, the military probably, and some evaluation kits. But in general, it really applies to everything which does something with radio. So it's really on the combination of software and hardware, and not only hardware as we had it before, or mostly hardware. So right now we can set things in software like frequency, strength, and so on. And you know, the DFS feature is there's a part in hardware and a part in software. When DFS is about detecting radars and then moving. So you can imagine that detecting the radars is part of the hardware, and it sends a signal like there's a radar, and then the software has to make sure it moves. And as you can imagine, this can be turned off. And as you can imagine, the people are not happy, at least the regulators are not happy if you turn that off. It should really move. And the question is, how can this be assessed? This is guaranteed that it will move if there's a radar for the DFS part, for example. And there are other examples similar to that. One other legal thing is that the EU Commission will define delegated acts to tell us which devices are actually concerned. So it says the Commission shall be empowered to adopt delegated acts specifying which categories or classes of radio equipment are concerned by each of the requirements. So it's these, basically the code red is the framework, and these delegated acts are like the tools which were used inside that framework. So that thing has a lot of history, as you can imagine. We didn't really notice because it was something in the background, or at least I don't know, because I don't follow what the EU is doing all the time. So it was adopted by the European Parliament in April 2014, and June 2016 was implemented in national laws, also in Germany, for example. And we talked a bit about that last year. And actually, from June 13, which is like next week, new devices which are made available in the market for the first time shall meet these requirements in the code red. The problem is that the delegated acts have not been written and there are no rules to follow, which is kind of a system fuck up. And there was some panic in the industry because people wanted to release new devices. You know, there's a new iPhone coming up, new Samsung, whatever. And the question is, can we even sell that? Because the law states we have to follow code red and the new regulations, but there are no regulations. We don't know how to certify. So some people complained and they said, okay, then we just use the old RNTTE regulations for a bit longer. So right now, or starting next week, we are in a phase where we still use the old ETSI standards until the new ones are ready. So these are basically the actors. There's the ETSI, which is technically responsible, and they also write the standards which we have to follow. So if you know, if you want to know how a Wi-Fi device should react on DFS, then you can find all of the times and the radar patterns and so on in a corresponding ETSI document. Executes, and the parliament which make the laws, and there are the EU member states which have to adopt these things. So it's with my basic knowledge of European legal stuff, what's going on, and we have a couple of problems with that, potentially. What we've the question is, how can the manufacturer make sure that the software does the right thing if you can replace the software, which we usually would like to do. And yeah, what these people do is to implement some kind of secure boot, digital rights management, trust chains, whatever. And yeah, then we can't just can't flash our images anymore. We can't flash any OpenWRT. Or we have to go to the vendor and say, hey, please verify. And then he says, oh, of course, I will do that. I will get your image, go to the certification lab, spend like $100,000 to certify your stuff, and in 6 months you can flash your OpenWRT. And next time you get a new image, we repeat the process. Personally, I don't think it's going to happen. Another idea which is floating around is cognitive radio. So the idea is that the device asks whoever's responsible to have a permit to use the frequency, which I see on your faces. It's like not so realistic. What would happen is like every device has to ask, hey, can I use the, I don't know, LTE or Wi-Fi spectrum for 10 minutes on that? And then they will say, yeah, sure, yeah, sure, yeah, sure, or no. And I don't know how this can be done technically. There will be a lot of requests. People can be tracked, which we probably also don't want. So there are some privacy issues with that. They can just prevent that, or if the agencies have some problems with their servers, then nobody can use anything. I don't know. I don't like this idea too much. Yeah.
So there actually is a way to do it that's not. It would be terrible if you have a broadcast. What you do is have one broadcast channel that just sort of lists the available frequencies in your region. And if you do the broadcast channel, then that channel is available. So you don't have to have individuals taking out licenses, but they receive a sort of license. So I think that's how it's going to be.
Okay, so just to repeat with a microphone, they have a broadcast channel to say which channels are allowed, and yeah, this is broadcasted in specific regions, and clients can pick that up. That sounds more reasonable to me. Yeah. Okay, so so who would have a problem? So there's a general problem to anyone doing free software potentially, so free competition. We have disadvantages for software and hardware producers, especially low power embedded device manufacturers, because they have to go through more hurdles, and yeah, especially for us who want to use or who create third-party software. And also, it's not clear how this compliance should be done especially for third parties. If only the manufacturers produces images, that would be fine. But for us third parties, I don't think it's clear, or there's a clear idea how to do that. Yeah, and the other thing is what is also not clear is who is actually concerned with that, because there is no clear definition who is in which class right now. Yeah, and we have additional bureaucracy, of course. Other threats are security. As you know, manufacturers just drop the support at some point, and then you keep all the nice security holes. It's a shift of legal responsibility. So now they are trying to shift the responsibility from the users to the manufacturers. Yeah. Solutions. Well, it's mostly a political problem. So we try to tackle that in a political way. There's an alliance with enterprise and community actors, and there has been a joint statement against radio lockdown. We have, you see all these companies and associations and community networks signing that. Yeah, we are also trying to talk to the Commission. So as I said, they still need to write the delegated acts. And actually, it's not like the Commission will write it. So it's a couple of politicians. They don't sit down and write that. So there will be an expert group who prepare the content for the EU Commission. And the Free Software Foundation of Europe applied, and also some other association applied from community, but there's no membership approval, also no denial. That's the update I got from last week. I'm not even sure if these expert groups exist already. Yeah, so that's the status. ETSI is supposed to interpret the directive and work on new harmonized standards. This is what they do. They write the standards. And what we also want to do is to influence, or at least make them aware of these problems which we have. So as I said, we have more than enough uncertainties right now. We don't know which devices and which software is actually affected by that. In the end, maybe we just are really scared and nothing, it's not a problem for us. That would be the best case. In worst case, we have just lockdown devices, and we don't know if that would be applicable to every software revision. Like, do we have to do with any build we make, with every release of LD or OpenWRT? We don't know when these harmonized standards will be finished. So right now we are waiting for them, but we don't know if it will be in 1 year or 3 years or 5 years. As I said, details of third-party software assessment. What do I do with my image? How can I talk to the manufacturer if he has to be responsible to sign it? There are currently more unclear things than clear things. That's a bit different of a situation compared to the FCC, where we had a rule. It stated, DDWRT must be prevented. They scratched that later, but right now here we just don't know, but we see this possible threat. But there are things which we can do. So there's a group of people working on that. You can talk to the people in the Free Software Foundation. There's a mailing list. There's the joint statement. Actually, I'm not sure if it still can be signed or not. You can ask your contacts to the Commission, to ETSI, to national authorities. I know some of us work in companies and academia who might have contacts to these kind of bodies. So please consider using those and getting some, more, making the situation a bit more clear. I just want to give a very short update on the FCC situation. It's just this slide. Because we talked about that a lot last year at BattleMesh, and there wasn't so much happening. There was one problem with TP-Link after that BattleMesh. So TP-Link was forced to find ways to support open source software by the FCC. Originally, TP-Link had different problems, but it was really that TP-Link offended some rules in 2.4 gigahertz with the original software. This was the original offending thing. And what they did is to say, TP-Link, please work with the community to find solutions. And they got a fine of $200,000. So, and at this point, the FCC sold it in the press releases like, so see, the FCC is on your side. There's no problem with the open source software, and it still can be flashed. And I was, okay, now it's solved. Great. I'm working with one manufacturer, and we were going to the lawyers, and they said, but the laws didn't change. It's still for 5 gigahertz devices. You have to make sure that there's no easy third-party software installations. So in my personal opinion, that did not really change a lot. Yeah, and one thing which I want to point out that code red thing is potentially much more dangerous because it restricts any radio. So in the US and for FCC, you can still use 2.4 gigahertz without any restriction. It only concerns the 5 gigahertz capable devices, which is, yeah, 802.11ac is 5 gigahertz only, so you can stick with the old 11n stuff, and that's okay. So code red is potentially much worse, depending on how it turns out.
Sorry.
Yeah.
No, just one comment about the FCC situation. We are looking into, because there is this AFCA agreement between Mexico, Canada, and the United States. The FCC equivalent in Mexico can also sign, like, approved devices, and they don't need to abide. So they have a bilateral, like, agreement that devices that are produced in Mexico can be sold in United States and vice versa. But, well, kind of usually goes the other way. But Mexican authorities we are exploring this, but they can certify devices to run on the US. So, and some of the people in some of the universities in Mexico want to help us, the Liberado project, to certify our devices to work there. The difference is that FCC rules worldwide, some ways. I mean, you certify FCC, you can sell it worldwide because everyone pairs with FCC. But if not, you can do that, and you need to do the other countries, but it's a longer path, but you can get it worldwide. So it's not a fact, it's a path that we are trying to find.
It's a process, yeah. Okay, yeah, that's interesting. That's actually true. There's a lot of these agreements that if you certify FCC, then you can, yeah, actually sell the device in many other countries with various restrictions. Sometimes you have to pay some money or have to, yeah, test some more things. Okay. Yeah, that's pretty much it from the talk. So there's some more information on the Free Software Foundation Europe website. There's a mailing list. And from Free Software Foundation, Max is organizing these things. So I would suggest, if you have some input, do not talk to me, or you can talk to me, but I would especially encourage you to talk to Max. Write him an email, register on the mailing list, and get in touch. There's also some references. You don't have to type that into your browser right now. I will provide the slides later so you can check these things. Yeah, and I would like to have an open discussion with you now, so please let me know about your comments, ideas, maybe experiences with routers, anything.
Well, we had that problem with TP-Link. I mean, the networks that we deploy from Altermundi, the LibreMesh networks, use this 2 radios setup with 2 antennas and such. So we tend to use the TP-Link WDR 3500, 3600, 4300, and many of them have come with this lockdown. So that's why we have LibreRouter. But that's it. I mean, there's not. We can do this. This has happened, and that this can happen again. That's why we need to be resilient enough to not depend on others' rulings, or at least abiding to a rule that we don't agree with. So we are not the manufacturers yet, so we can't fight this in that field. We just have to accept what happens in in their area and see what we can do. But if we are the manufacturers also, then we can say we don't agree with this, and our users don't agree with this, and fight that fight together with the Free Software Foundation, the EFF, and such.
Yep.
So.
So I guess I want to say, like, this is one of those weird political situations where it's actually not very political, and there's not necessarily that much of a fight to be had. Like, the real thing they're trying to solve is the silly weather radar business, where weather radar is so sensitive that one idiot who misconfigures their OpenWRT router in the city, suddenly the weather radar doesn't work. And that's the degree of terribleness of this kind of interference. And so they created these DFS channels by recycling this particular frequency that they use for weather radar, and to try to benefit Wi-Fi. So everybody is actually on the same side. Like, nobody actually wants to lock down router firmware. All they want to do is stop people from accidentally messing up the weather radar. And so I think, at least with the FCC and the movements I've seen in the US, the most constructive stuff that happens is when you don't frame it as a fight, you frame it as a, like, well, I understand your problem and that it's a really important problem. How can we also solve this problem without accidentally crushing it? I think the FCC is really sensitive to that, to my surprise, because I assumed that they would be my enemy. But they're actually really sensitive. They really want to make it possible to put open source software on routers. They just don't know how to get both goals accomplished at the same time. And I don't know either, actually. So that's really where we have to look. It's not about convincing people, it's about how do you even do it? What's the technological solution we can offer and say, this will solve your problem? Because I think they will probably go along with that. I don't know if it's the same in the EU, but the FCC has been very open to that kind of input.
Okay, it seems that having every here it's going to be very productive. We are not American citizens, so it's hard for us to talk with the FCC. And on the other side, it's about conflict of interests, because some citizens may want to flash their devices, and some other citizens may want to have information about the weather. Like, it's a conflict of interest. It's not that something is more important than the other, and they are being opinionated on this matter. So, yes.
Actually, I have to disagree to that, because the weather radars are used at airports for flight security. So I think this information, they are used if the weather is not good, to make the planes arrive and land safely. So I think this information is actually more important, because it's about lives of people landing in the airplane, compared to if can I use Skype now or not.
Okay, so we may even think about, for on one side, from the hardware side, so how to resolve this, how to find better detection of radars so we don't fuck with their networks, and also, for example, not do that. I mean, if you do a global lockdown, then rural networks where there is no airplane in hundreds of kilometers, get fucked up.
Right. I don't think anyone actually wants a global lockdown. I think they see there's this emergency, which is people screwing up weather radar. It's an actual, like, major serious problem. Now that there's a lot of 5 gigahertz devices out there, they're actively getting weather radar getting jammed by accident. So they have to fix it, and this was sort of the, like, knee-jerk reaction. But they don't actually, like, there's nobody petitioning the FCC saying we really think all router firmware should be locked down. There's nobody in that camp, right? That's the important thing to understand. There's only people who want to say, like, can you please stop the weather radar interference somehow? And so all we need to do is offer a way to do that. It's just that it's actually a really hard problem, and I don't personally know what the solution is.
So I think actually all of that is a collateral, because I mean, now not in this room, but usually we hackers are in the minority, and most of the people use the stock firmware as they are. So they say, or maybe they are not even perfectly aware of that problem. But yeah, they see that there is a problem with these couple of users who don't manage to use the devices correctly. And another point I would like to make technically, these weather radars actually mostly operate on 5.6 to 5.65 gigahertz, so it's actually only a small portion of a DFS. And at least in Europe, we have much harder requirements for DFS, which are almost impossible to meet, like 99.99% reliability to detect radar signals, and also like 5 to 10 times higher times. So you have to initially wait 10 minutes instead of 1 minute before you can use the channel and so on, which does not even make it interesting to use these channels. And the FCC blocked these channels completely, so you're not allowed to use 5.6 to 5.65 gigahertz at all. That was a recent change in the last couple of years. So I wonder why we can't just try to enforce that one. But that's, again, a technical question to be asked to the right people.
And another question is, there are so many other frequencies for weather radar. Why are we still using these 5 gigahertz weather radars?
The water and such. But so there is another field that have troubles with airports and such. It's the field of drones. So the smarter drones have this feature that they have a global database of airports or restricted areas where they don't fly. I had one, and when I turn on my drone, the drone says, this is a no-flight area. You can't fly here. And if our routers could come with a GPS, then like. But then you can know when to use which frequency where, because you know where. I mean, I don't know if the weather stations are located close to the devices and which radius you need to be clear to not fuck with them. But if we have that equation, then we can actually don't mess with them without knowing. Yeah. And that's also what is being done on the TV white space frequencies. You have a database that you have to query first, and say you need a secondary network to access a database, and you ask for a frequency, and they say, okay, you can use it, or you can't use it, or this is the channel that you can use. And that works.
Yeah, so the second thing you said was similar to that cognitive radio thing I had in the slides. The first thing is GPS, to use GPS and define no Wi-Fi or restricted zones. And actually this has been proposed a couple of times in the last 10 years. Also the DFS standards are quite old. But the manufacturers didn't really like that. And there are also some technical problems. So it makes the devices more expensive, of course, and also more complex. But especially if you think about IoT devices, right? If your light switch has a Wi-Fi chip inside, or then you don't have a GPS, and the GPS won't even work indoors.
No, because I'm not that. I don't have enough information to give my opinion on this, but I will do it anyways. So the problem is not with indoor Wi-Fi, but with outdoor Wi-Fi, right? I mean, if you have a low power device inside your house that is in the same frequency, it's not fucking with the other device.
I'm not sure how sensitive these radars really are. Of it, yeah.
Yeah, but
I'm not exactly sure, but I've heard that the weather radars are extremely sensitive. And that's the real problem, because if it was just interfering within a radius of like 100 meters or something, it wouldn't be a big deal. It's that it interferes for multiple kilometers, which is a useless Wi-Fi signal, but it's enough to make it look like it's a light rain in the airport.
Sorry, what I saw, I was last week with Hermano Prieto Semoli from the ICTP, and he was showing us the channels in the 5 gigahertz frequency bandwidth. Don't worry. So the channels are only restricted in the outdoor classification of radios, not in the indoor classification of radios.
Yeah.
So IoT in the household will not suffer. IoT in the urban level may suffer.
But
Okay, so this is where the EU regulation is too broad because they just apply to any radio device. But yeah, that's true. These 5 gigahertz where you have DFS, most of them are for outdoor. Only the first 4 channels are DFS indoor channels.
4 channels indoor, then a bunch of channels indoor with DFS, and then
Yeah.
DFS outdoor.
Yeah, exactly.
But the question is, if you don't have GPS, you're either indoor or the GPS device broke or anything. And what do you do? How do you know you're indoor?
So I think the GPS thing, I mean, in general with all this stuff, if you're not sure, you're not allowed to use the channel. So that's a pretty easy one. The real problem with the GPS, other than the price, is that it all comes down to the same thing. If I replace my firmware, I can lie about the GPS signal and then turn on the DFS channel where I shouldn't, right? So like all of the solutions are sort of, the real circle is like, can someone interfere with the radar? Now, I think that the real place where there's room for compromise is like, how hard do you have to make it to override the setting? So a checkbox, which I think TP-Link put in their interface at one point, that's no good. If any user can just check the checkbox and get faster Wi-Fi, someone will do it by accident. If you make it so that you really have to know what you're doing to definitely select a button that definitely does something illegal, and people are unlikely to press that button, you might have a chance of saying like, look, make a regulation where that makes that person responsible instead of making the software hardware manufacturer responsible. Because right now, I mean, there's always going to be a point. Like if I modified my hardware, I can definitely make it interfere with weather radar, right? No matter what you do with security keys and stuff like that, I can put an amplifier and a frequency shifter in front of the antenna and interfere with the radar. And everybody understands that. And obviously, if I did that, I would be directly violating FCC rules, and I would be subject to that fine, right? So the question is, where in the spectrum between checkbox and physically modifying the hardware is the line drawn? And I think they are very open to that kind of discussion. They want to have an answer that is reasonable, that will allow people to do their open source firmware. They want to do this, at least the FCC does. I don't know if the EU has necessarily thought about it. But they want to do this, but they need a proposal that will work. And so far, there haven't been very many good ones.
So one proposal could be just use a bunch of questions from the ham radio license. And if you can answer, then you're probably allowed to, because you have a ham radio license. And then you're responsible for what you do. At least this is as far as I know how it works with this license.
Yeah, but it also is a question who answers these kind of questions, right? The user, like my grandma who installs a Wi-Fi router, or the manufacturer. This is also a shift, right, between the manufacturer and the user. What happens right now, and even before it was in the regulations that you should not have any UI quirks that you can just say disable DFS. So for example, we had some manufacturers in Germany who had a country code list, and one of the countries was I don't care country, and the I don't care country lets you do anything, and that's obviously illegal.
Ubiquiti called it test mode.
Yeah, so these, and actually at this point the manufacturers fucked up, and also the TP-Link, they were offending with something very, what you can see on first sight, some kind of thing which was in the UI, which just disabled something or too many channels, something like that.
So again, it's important for the regulators to understand that no rule can apply globally or to a big region, because a rule that applies to in a city doesn't apply to the rural area, or a rule that applies in the sea doesn't apply on the land. So it's important for them to rule in understanding the field, and then if you can apply or not, depending on the costs and such, it's okay. If not, the manufacturers will have to go to downgrade to something that is going to be less effective or less broadly compatible, but the regulations need to be as tight as we can, so we have the freedom, the most amount of freedom in each condition, not ruling more, so it's easier to implement. Okay, like if you're in the rural area and there is no TV or GSM or Wi-Fi, ask for a license that costs millions of dollars to use GSM when no one wants to go there. Use it.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, at least in Europe, they don't even differentiate a lot between devices, or at least there is no differentiation right now. But I see your point, because these products are usually made for, let's say, Europe or US, and like in some countries you just don't care. Things are still getting restricted, so that's a problem.
It's not only countries getting restricted, it's also getting groups of people getting restricted. As I said, with the ham radio people. They are allowed to use it. They are even allowed to use higher transmission power because they have a license for that. And they can't.
Or even in Canada, United States, and Mexico, the native nations, the first nations, indigenous nations, have their own rulings that their air is for them to use, but as these regulators prohibit everyone in a global scale, then they can't use. They don't have resources to do whatever they want in their own territory.
Any more comments, questions, discussion proposals?
So we can close the session now. I think I'm here until Sunday, so for Saturday night. So going back on Sunday. So if there's any more question or if you want to discuss, just let me know.
Then
Thanks
thank
a lot.
you very much, Simon.